Good evening, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for joining us for this virtual budget consultation session for Ward 13. I'm Rawlson King, Councillor for Rideau-Rockcliffe, and I'm pleased to provide sessions where residents can share comments on the 2025 draft budget and provide input on the city's priorities and also potentially where to find potential savings. Through this meeting and I'm really pleased that many people have joined us tonight. We also, as you might be aware, held an equity budget consultation 2 nights ago as well. So it looks like we would have consulted, hopefully with nearly 100 people based on registration. But though this specific meeting is being held remotely through Zoom and we're meeting virtually, the land on which Ottawa is built upon is unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few important notes about tonight's session. We will be recording this session and posting it on my office's YouTube channel. So if you prefer not to appear on video, please feel free to turn your video off. To ensure clear communication, we ask that you keep your microphone muted until a moderator invites you to ask your question. For the best viewing experience, you may want to select speaker view instead of gallery view to focus on the current speaker. And we also have the capacity to take questions in French. My staff member, Athena, is on this call and will be able to facilitate any questions so that we can address both questions in both official languages. So let me share some important context about this year's budget process. City Council has directed that the overall municipal tax increase be set at no more than 2.9% for 2025. This includes the citywide tax levy that funds most city services, including the library and public health, as well as the police services levy. The Transit Commission is developing its budget considerations based on multiple factors, including potential fare adjustments and service levels, as well as based on a request for funding from senior levels of government as they work to address significant financial challenges. So we did not specifically set a budget direction for transit services, but the rest of the services were set by the majority of council at 2.9%. For the average urban homeowner with a property assessed at $415,000, this would mean an increase of approximately $125 for the year. For rural homeowners with similar assessment values, the increase would be about $102 annually. What makes this year's budget process particularly important is that we're facing several key challenges. The city must balance increasing costs from inflation, the need to maintain and upgrade aging infrastructure, and the imperative to invest in climate change initiatives, all while keeping services affordable for residents. Your participation in this session tonight is invaluable, as engaging in the municipal budget process plays a vital role in shaping our community. The municipal budget guides how we allocate public funds across essential services like transit, infrastructure, and social programs. Through your active involvement, you help ensure these resources are distributed fairly and meet our community's diverse needs. We also thought it was important for us to hear from you before the budget is tabled in November. And that's so that while we have continuing discussions with staff, the mayor's office, as well as the city manager's office, we can provide direct input in terms of how the budget should be formulated before the budget is tabled. Often people feel that once it's tabled, there isn't room for change. And so we heard that based on previous consultations that we've held. And so this year, we are holding the consultation before the budget is tabled. But as always, you can always reach out to my office to ensure that you provide input after the proposed budget is made available. We're really doing this to ensure that we hear from you, because when residents engage in the budget process, they or you become powerful advocates for local priorities. Your voices help identify the projects and programs that directly impact quality of life in our neighborhoods, from improving our roads to enhancing our parks. This engagement also strengthens transparency and accountability in local government, as you have the opportunity to question expenditures and ensure responsible use of taxpayers' money. The budget process timeline is important to note. So like I was saying, the draft budget will be tabled at City Council on November 13th. Following that, various committees will review their portions of the budget between November 18th and December 5th. And the final budget will be considered for adoption by City Council on December 11th. Throughout this process, there will be numerous opportunities for public input, including tonight's session. And of course, at those committees as well, there will be the opportunity for the public interest groups, other organizations to delegate on the specific budgets that come before these specific committees. The budget process also obviously plays a key role in driving economic development. Your input can help shape investments in local businesses, job training programs, and infrastructure projects that create employment opportunities and enhance our area's economic vitality. Furthermore, your participation contributes to long-term strategic planning, helping ensure sustainable growth and development that will benefit our community for years to come. This year's budget will continue to demonstrate our responsibility to the community. It's important for us to have these discussions to ensure that we continue to hear from you and focus on a lot of areas of priority. Personal areas of priority for me include transit, obviously, more investments in social services, as well as more investments in infrastructure, as well as our parks. So these are areas that are key to me based on what I've been hearing from residents. But we obviously are here to listen to you. So I really want to thank you for being here tonight to share your thoughts and priorities for our community's future. Your input will help shape not just the 2025 budget, but also, I believe, the future of the city. And with that, I want to pass the presentation on to Cyril Rogers, who is our city's General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services Department, and is the city's Chief Financial Officer, for a presentation.
Thank you, Councillor, and welcome everybody. So tonight I am joined with two members of my team, Svetlana Valkova and Sarah Brown. So Svetlana will be walking through the presentation, and we'll be here for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Tonight's presentation is really what we've been trying to do this term of council, is really provide a more representation of what the budget means. It's a very complex document, and we've been really focusing on making the documentation, supporting documents, and the presentations more user-friendly to the resident, trying to really dig into how the budget works, how the budget comes together, and make it more reflective and understandable to everyday users, if you will. So that's the intent of the presentation. And again, Svetlana will walk through it, and then we'll be here for questions at the end. So with that, I'll pass over to Svetlana.
Actually going to kick us off tonight. So thank you. I'm Sarah Brown, Interim Deputy Chief Financial Officer. And if we could get the slides up. So I'll get us started, and then Svetlana will take us through the second part of the presentation. So we can go to the next slide, please. So today's presentation is broken down into three sections: municipal budget basics, the council endorsed budget process and development, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. The purpose of today's presentation is to help residents better understand and become more engaged in the budgeting process. I also want to highlight that we'll be providing information around the budget framework to develop the city's budget and not touch on any specifics of the 2025 draft budget, which will be released when the budget is tabled on November 13th. Next slide, please. So diving into municipal budget basics, we'll cover off the requirements to have a balanced budget under the Municipal Act and what that means, the differences between an operating and capital budget, what funding sources we have available, the city's various budgets and tax levies, and other sources of revenue such as user fees and charges. Next slide, please. So every year, the City of Ottawa produces a municipal budget. The budget is one of the most important documents the city produces and is the blueprint that defines how resources are collected and allocated. Unlike our federal and provincial counterparts who can budget for a deficit, the Ontario Municipal Act requires all municipalities to balance their budget each year. So what this means is expenditures must equal revenues, or money going out must equal money coming in when building and adopting our overall budget. To balance the budget, we can use different levers such as increasing revenues through property taxes or user fees. And we can also decrease or manage expenses by finding efficiencies to provide better value for money for those same services. Next slide, please. So we'll start off on the left-hand side. The $5 billion operating budget covers the ongoing day-to-day expenses the city incurs to deliver programs and services to residents and also maintain our infrastructure. A few examples of our operating budget include the cost to deliver winter operations, including snow removal, road maintenance, such as pothole repairs, park maintenance, including grass cutting, emergency services, such as fire and paramedics, facilities and building maintenance cost, all our utility and fuel consumption, materials and supply used, and also our staff salaries. If we compare this to personal budgeting, this is equivalent to spending on things like groceries, clothing, insurance, water, and hydro. Now switching over to the right-hand side, the capital budget provides for acquisition of new or replacement of existing infrastructure that has a benefit of greater than 1 year. The capital budget excludes the operating cost of those assets, since this forms part of the operating budget. And the capital budget is also developed in accordance with the various council approved documents, such as the Transportation Master Plan, the Infrastructure Master Plan, the Development Charges Background Study, and the various other long-range financial plans. A few examples of our capital budget include road paving and resurfacing, new sidewalks and bike lanes, the purchase of buses and snowplows, new recreation and community centers, play structures and parks, libraries, and arenas. Next slide, please. So again, we'll start off on the left-hand side. 50% of the funding sources for the operating budget come from annual property taxes and payment in lieu of taxes, which is essentially property taxes on federal government buildings. The remaining 50% comes from user fees and charges, which includes your water bill, transit fares, fees at our recreational facilities for things like swimming and skating lessons, and then the remainder comes from provincial and federal funding. These are largely for social services programs that the city delivers on behalf of the province and includes a portion of our paramedic services. Then moving over to the right-hand side, the capital budget funding sources, which pay for our infrastructure, including new roads, buildings, sidewalks, are made up approximately half from reserves. So this is similar to a homeowner that would have set aside savings for a number of years to do a renovation in the future, and then once they draw upon those savings to complete that renovation. At the city, we have various reserves restricted for certain uses. As an example, we have reserves set up exclusively for water, wastewater, and stormwater. So money that's contributed into those reserves can only be used to pay for water infrastructure. We then have about a fourth of the funding sources from debt. So this is similar to a homeowner taking out a mortgage to purchase a new home or accessing a line of credit to complete a renovation or upgrade on their home. In Ontario, municipalities can issue long-term debt to fund capital projects. However, the Municipal Act limits that this cannot exceed more than 25% of the total owned sources of revenue. However, the city's fiscal framework then further limits this debt level lower to 7.5%. Finally, the remaining funding sources come from development charges. These are charges paid by developers when constructing a new home or subdivision, and a portion of that charge is then allocated to an account to pay for infrastructure required by those new subdivisions, including roads, parks, water, and wastewater infrastructure. Next slide, please. The city has 3 separate tax levies, which form part of your property tax bill. There's the citywide tax levy, the transit levy, and the police services levy. You can actually see how these are broken down on the second page of your property tax bill. The citywide tax levy pays for things like winter operations and recreational programs, whereas the transit and police services levy must be used exclusively for those respective services. The fourth component is our rate-supported budget, which is our water, wastewater, and stormwater user fees. Revenues collected under those user fees must be used exclusively to support those programs. Next slide, please. Most of the city's programs and services are funded by annual property taxes, which are referred to as tax-supported services, and are funded by the citywide tax levy on your property tax bill. Examples of tax-supported programs and services include roads and winter maintenance, parks, recreational programs, libraries, public health, etc. It's important to note that some of the tax-supported programs receive provincial funding. For example, public health is funded 75% from the province and 25% from the city. Paramedics is funded 50-50 from the province and the city. And then community and social services, such as long-term care, housing, or social services, vary in provincial funding by program. Next slide, please. Transit services budget. The council-endorsed city fiscal framework states the transit fares recover 55% of the operating cost, and the remaining 45% comes from the transit tax levy. Transit services also receives funding through the provincial and federal gas tax. The city's transit services falls under the authority of the Transit Commission and includes services provided by OC Transpo, Paratranspo, and the city's LRT. For the police services budget, the police services tax levy funds the operating and capital budget of that service, and this budget falls under the authority of the Police Services Board. Next slide, please. City's water, wastewater, and stormwater services are funded through a separate user fee charged to residents on their bi-monthly water bill or as a fee on their property tax bill. These programs and services are referred to as our rate-supported services. These are also very capital-intensive programs with a lot of the infrastructure being underground, making it more expensive to repair and install. Therefore, a large portion of the revenues is directed towards the capital program for this service area. Examples of the rate-supported programs and services include drinking water purification, delivery of clean water, collection and treatment of wastewater, stormwater management, and water meter installation. The budget for the city's rate-supported services falls under the authority of the Environment and Climate Change Committee and is also directed by the council-approved rate long-range financial plan. Next slide, please. The Municipal Act allows municipalities to impose fees and charges to cover costs of delivering services. Revenues generated are used to offset the cost of providing that goods or service. Examples of user fees and charges include transit fares, recreational program fees, facility and arena rentals, building and parking permits, etc. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it off to Svetlana, who's going to take you through the second section of today's presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. So now we will delve into the budget process and how the budget is developed, the committee structure and budget books, the 2025 budget enhancements, term of council priorities, and 2025 budget council and committee meeting schedule. Next slide, please. Beginning with the budget process itself, I would like to reiterate that the budget is a year-round process, and we will go over the budget directions, public engagement, and budget tabling and adoption. Next slide, please. The budget cycle formally kicks off with the council-approved budget directions. For the 2025 budget, this was approved by council on September 18th. The budget direction report identifies the approach and timetable, plus the upper limit tax increases to the citywide police services and transit tax levies. In addition, it identifies the guiding principles and fiscal framework to develop the budget that includes, but not limited to, forecasting revenues, determining the rate program increases, and changes to user fees and charges. Next slide, please. Another key component of the budget process is public engagement. Opportunities for residents to share feedback are contacting one's ward councillor, online engagement via Engage Ottawa, councillor-led public consultations, enhanced social media posts, electronic advertisements at city facilities, and a promotional video of how to engage on the city budget. Next slide, please. The city's draft budget is tabled at council. The city's budget is broken down into a series of budgets recognized by each of these standing committees, and each committee is forwarded their draft budget for review. Each standard committee reviews the draft operating and capital budgets for the city program services departments under their mandate, and then makes recommendations regarding their draft budgets, which are forwarded to council for consideration. After all standard committees have reviewed and made recommendations regarding their draft budgets, council reviews all budget recommendations at the same time. After council has reviewed and voted on all the committee budget recommendations, the city's final budget is adopted. Next slide, please. Each city service area reports to a standing committee. The budget books are organized by standing committee and include the detailed budget information for the various city programs and services under the purview and mandate of each committee. And on this slide, you can see that in November, there is a committee meeting that scheduled for each budget. For each committee. Next slide, please. Enhancement were based on feedback since the 2024 budget. The goal of this enhancement is to improve budget literacy and improve engagement by removing barriers to participate. Enhancements are listed on the slide, but of note, some enhancements are today's technical briefing, introducing an improved 2025 budget, draft budget explorer with enhanced reporting and online contact. And ultimately, we're looking to create an understanding of the investments being made across our services and programs that serve our community. Next slide, please. The 2025 draft budget will ensure and highlight its alignment to the term of council priorities that are as seen on this slide. A city that has affordable housing for and is more livable for all. A city that is more connected with reliable, safe, and accessible mobility options. A city that is green and resilient. And a city with a diversified and prosperous economy. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation and opening the floor for questions to councillors and staff.
Thank you so much for that in-depth presentation that really provides the context as to the budget process. We do have a number of people on the call, and maybe what I'll do is I might ask Erin to maybe moderate some of the questions. You'll have an opportunity to either ask questions through the chat mechanism, or you can raise your virtual hand in Zoom. So maybe we might start with the chat question that has first come in, and maybe I'll get Erin to read the question, and then we will be able to look at answering it.
Thank you, Councillor. We have a question in the chat. Is there an opportunity for community and grassroots organizations and youth groups to have engagement and meaningful participation, dialogues, and discussions in the budget development?
Absolutely. So there are definitely opportunities through virtual means and in-person means, and also contacting our office. We were pleased to hold an equity budget consultation just a few days ago. That was also in person and hybrid. And obviously, we're holding this consultation today, where you can ask questions, as well as there is, of course, the opportunity to pose your thoughts at committee directly through delegation. And so I really encourage all residents to take advantage of that opportunity to come before committee after you've read the specific budget that's pertinent to your interests, and to provide comment. And I actually do know that Mr. Narudan actually did that, and in the last budget cycle, and I actually think it had some impact in terms of investments in personal literacy for youth that was driven by a Black-led organization that actually undertook that financial literacy program in Overbrook. So you do make impact. The other element I wanted to make you aware of is that through the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, there is a proposal to ensure that the city does engage with more diverse youth, and they are looking to hold a forum, so an in-person forum for youth in either the first or second quarter of next year. And I think that will also provide an opportunity not just to link a youth to different economic opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, employment opportunities, but frankly, there's always the opportunity to provide input as to city services, where you want dollars to be spent, what variation of services that you'd like to see. So I would just say continue to keep engaged. We take every opportunity to listen to youth, at least my office. We really endeavor to do that, and we endeavor to see their concerns translated into policy.
We have a couple of more questions from the chat. Would you like me to proceed, Councillor?
I think we should probably alternate. And I know that Robin raised his hand first. So maybe if you can alternate between the messages from the chat and the ones that we'll take live, I think that will work for everybody.
Great. Hey, Rawlson.
Hey.
My question is for Cyril. I won't surprise him, but so Sarah said something that, Cyril, you said a number of times, and saying that the money from the police levy, I think the language you used, it must be used exclusively for that purpose, suggesting you can't move money from the police budget to anywhere else. But in 2021, under the leadership of Rawlson King, when he was on the police board and on city council, $2.65 million got withheld from the $14 million proposed police budget and moved to youth and mental health programs. So can you please comment on that, Cyril?
Yeah, absolutely. So for strict transparency and clarity, the reality is the money that there's three different levies, as we outlined: citywide levy, the transit levy, the OPS levy. As per policy, the police levy revenue comes in and gets allocated to police services. Now, council could direct or suggest, they can't direct, sorry, they can suggest to the Ottawa Police Services Board to reduce that amount. So the Ottawa Police Services Board deems that acceptable, they can reduce that. So effectively reduce the tax allocation in that year and reduce that funding. The board can do that, yes. So, and again, as a very simple example, right now the direction is for the Police Services Board, because the Police Services Board owns the budget, to develop their budget at 2.9. If council puts a request or recommendation forward to the Police Services Board to develop a 2% budget, and the Police Services Board accepts that direction, then that residual 9.9% could come back to the city. So there is a process to do that. So just for clarity.
And I hope that answers Robin's question. Aaron, I think that Deborah has asked questions, but I'm thinking that those questions can be combined and hopefully directed to Cyril for commentary. So if you could combine those two questions, it would be much appreciated.
Absolutely, Councillor. So the first part of her question is, what is the audit process to ensure that funds are appropriately spent? And the second part of her question is, what is the size of the existing reserves for both operating and capital budgets?
So I'll take the first one first. So there's several audit functions. So number one, from a financial statement perspective, all of our financial statements are audited by external auditors. That's a requirement that goes through a very strenuous process as like any organization. The municipality, the public sector is bounded by what we call PSAP. So that's the accounting standards. So from a financial perspective, those controls and audit functions are in place. From an internal perspective, the budget council adopts and approves the budget. And within that budget, that gives delegated authority to the respective departments to spend to those levels. In addition to that, we have over 200 different policies. Not all touch on budget and spending, but we have quite a few policies and procedures within the city that defines and directs how certain funding can be spent, what delegated authority different managers have. We also report back several times throughout the year in terms of the use of delegated authority. We also have within the Finance and Corporate Services Department, we have a compliance team that does internal audit type functions on the policies and procedures. Most of our policies and procedures are reviewed every 4 to 5 years, and throughout that time frame, again, we do compliance checks on the use of the policies. In addition, internally, we do monthly reporting on all the financials at the department level, right down to the manager within the service area of the department. We also provide quarterly status reports. So throughout the year, we provide Q1, Q2, Q3 reports, and then a final disposition report at year end, where we basically provide variances analysis on all spending that occurred throughout the year from a budget to actual perspective. From a procurement perspective, we also provide a mid-year procurement report, which is going at the next FinCorp. Then we also provide a year-end procurement report that lists all the procurement activities undergone in the city, how that was procured, whether it was through standing offer, competitive procurement process, that's reported on. In addition to that, I'm probably forgetting a few others, but again, there's very stringent terms of accounting standards from a financial process. Spending authorities are limited based on your level. We report out on all those dimensions. Even from a capital perspective, once the capital budget is adopted and approved at a project-by-project basis, we have over 700 projects in the city. Any variance that overspending needs to be reported back to committee and council. So all those controls are in place from a spending perspective. Oh, and second question, like went on there a little too long. I forgot there was a second question. The current balance, don't quote me, I don't have it at my fingertips, but I think the combined balance right now is just over, I think it's in the $500 to $550 million range. This is a question I get every year during budget. Typically in the past, if you look at the past 3 to 4 years, we did peak just over 600 million in our reserves. Our normal rate is typically around that $450 to $500 million range. And some context there. in 2020 when the pandemic hit, we went forward to council with a number of financial strategies to help risk mitigate the unknowns of the pandemic. Throughout 2020, 21, and 22, we did significant capital deferrals. So what that means was there was a large number of capital projects that were approved where we kind of paused. We hit the pause button and we returned all those funds, just over $90 million, back into the respective reserves as a mitigation strategy, because each year of 2020, 21, 22, the pandemic, the amount of provincial and federal funding was unknown from year to year. So we actually built up our reserves by pausing a significant number of our capital plan projects, just in case. We came through the pandemic in a very good financial position, thanks to the federal provincial funding, but also thanks to some of those mitigation strategies. In the 23 and 24 budget process, we returned all those paused capital projects back into activation, if you will. So you will see, if you look at our continuity schedules year over year on ottawa.ca, you will see the reserves kind of peak in 2021 and 22, and then a little bit of a dip. And that's really driven from the fact, again, that we paused approved capital projects until we got through the pandemic, and then we reinstated that spending for those projects to continue.
Appreciate that detailed answer, and I think it's important for us to have that level of detail in terms of the response. I was just also curious if you could just briefly speak, Cyril, to the way that those reserves are governed, because often people don't realize that some of the reserves have restrictions.
Yeah, great question. And so right now we have, I think it's roughly 26, 27 different reserves. And we break those down into what we define as discretionary reserves versus non-discretionary reserves. And I'll give a couple of examples. So again, the transit levy, the transit tax collection, that revenue is allocated to transit along with some other revenue sources. They have a transit operating reserve and they have a transit capital reserve. So as per the bylaw, every reserve is accompanied by a council bylaw. The funding that goes into those reserves needs to be funded through a transit funding source. The money that comes out of those reserves got to be allocated to a transit initiative or a transit expense. The tax stabilization, that's one of our main reserves. So that reserve right now, that balance is about $100 million balance. That's our main reserve that we use in terms of if we finish a year with a significant deficit, that tax stabilization reserve is there as a savings account. So that's what we would deem as a savings account for scenarios where there are significant events throughout the year. What I can say is we do have a council adopted reserve policy. So again, it kind of goes back to the audit question. Every reserve the reserves are accompanied by a bylaw and a policy. The council endorsed policy states that the tax stabilization reserve should be at a maximum balance of about $57 million. Today, that reserve sits at $100 million, so we're in a good position from them. What I would also say is that throughout the years, one of our biggest variables from a year spending is winter operations. We can't control Mother Nature. 2 years ago, we had a $26 million plus deficit in winter operations. We knew coming out of April, so we do have a calendar year, January through December 31st. So the first after winter season 2 years ago, January through April, we had a very, very harsh winter where we were tracking kind of a significant deficit. So internally, we employed discretionary spending freeze, hiring pause. So by the time we actually finished the fiscal year in the year, we finished with small surplus. So that enabled us to take mitigation strategies internally, so we didn't have to touch our savings account. Some other reserves, we also have a federal gas tax reserve. What that gas tax reserve is basically we get funding from the federal government from gas tax. So when you fill up your car with gas, you pay gas tax. That money goes into the federal bucket, if you will, and then they allocate that funding back to municipalities based on a funding formula. Again, that money must be used. There's restrictions on what that money can be used at. This council has directed city staff to use that federal gas money exclusively for transit-related initiatives. Again, the caveat, 2 years ago, we did get a one-time bump of $58 million, or 3 years ago, I think, in which council directed that one-time bump to go into roads infrastructure. So again, there's limitations from the federal program and how that money can be spent, and then we get further direction from council on how we allocate it. And I'll stop here, Councillor, because I can go on with the other 20 plus reserves, but I think that gets the gist of the restrictions that every reserve comes with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's important to understand the dynamics of how the reserves are utilized, just to for the edification of residents. Thank you for that response, and I think Elizabeth is next. And I don't know if it's my connection or yours, Elizabeth, but it's very staticky. So I don't know if you can re-log in or try again, but we just can't hear you. And I'm hoping it's not my connection. Okay. Yeah, no, it's very challenging to hear you. You're breaking up. What I might ask is if my staff member can also, when Elizabeth comes back on, even sending the phone number for the Zoom link, it would be great. In lieu of that, why don't we move on to Lynn?
Can you hear me? Is it working okay?
I can hear you.
Great. So I was really glad to see when they're talking about the city's priorities, there was housing and a livable community and so on. So I'm going to speak to affordable housing and the importance of enough money in the budget to be able to create more nonprofit rental housing, which would have a range of rents so that it will reach the some rent geared to income as well as market or below market rents. So last year, there was a capital fund that had $30 million. Listen to this, $30 million over a whole budget that the city would put into affordable housing. And one of the things that's really important I want to speak to is at least let's keep that 30 million in that fund, because I know other money comes in from the province and CMHC and adds to it and gives more money. And so let's at least keep what's there. To me, it's very small when you think about how much the capital funding is for many, many other things. So that's really important. Second is to make sure that there's adequate requirement that within that pot, that a percentage be used for seniors housing. So our seniors in Ottawa are a growing group, a demographic, and seniors are homeless. Seniors are on the waiting list for rent geared to income housing. And so we need to make sure that the policy of using that capital budget and other things includes the right percent of seniors at the moment, and that's 18% of our population. So let's make sure that 18% of the affordable new rental housing that's being built will be for seniors. So, and then anything else you can do, Ralston, that on pots of money, things that I don't know about and so on, to push the affordable housing branch is doing a good job. They're trying, but there just isn't enough money and there isn't enough being done. So let's every opportunity in these budget discussions to please make sure you plug in the wording, the money, whatever. I know it's operating budget, the capital budget particularly, to make sure you keep it at what's been and increase if possible. Thank you.
I appreciate those comments. We will definitely note them, and I wholeheartedly believe in them. You're absolutely right. The amount of capital allocated is not enough to the need. I know
No.
that some of the city councilors last year were trying to play around with a $40 million, $50 million number. Of course, we did effectively double the amount. From 15 million to 30 million. I think that's very important, and it's a start. As well as we are starting to see the potential for injections from senior levels of government. In the last year, within this last year, council approved a spending plan of up to the $176.3 million that was promised to the city of Ottawa through the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund. It's going to be very important for us to obtain dollars from senior levels of government to do this. And I say that because I just want to be realistic with residents. Yes, we have a $5.5 plus billion budget, but as we know, much of the spending there is mandated. So once you start, going through the services that are required by the province that we are required to provide, people get shocked at this. Not much is left in discretionary within that discretionary envelope. And then often within the discretionary envelope, there are services that people would not consider discretionary, like the library, as an example. So once you start then whittling down those numbers, you realize there isn't a lot of discretionary revenue to play with. And that's the challenge that we have. The other challenge, too, is the advocacy one in terms of greater investments from senior levels of government, because honestly, they have gotten out of the business of housing. And so where I completely agree with you is that we need to not be as market dependent. This is my political view. If we are going to be serious about addressing people in low income prevalent neighborhoods who need housing, then that needs to be a rent geared to income. And we know that the province got out of that business line in a sense. And the province itself withdrew from housing responsibility a number of years ago, downloaded it to the municipalities, and didn't provide us with the material stream of revenue to either improve the housing stock or expand the housing stock. So it is a pickle for municipal governments, but we are working hard in terms of the resources that we have. And I completely agree with you that we need to expand those resources, especially around nonprofit or housing, our own housing agency.
Yes.
Because we know that that's where we'll also have better controls around providing housing to seniors who are in need, or providing housing to the indigent poor, frankly. It's not going to be provided by the private sector.
No, not at all.
And that's the other issue, is that the province is kind of driven by these market force mechanisms versus talking about really injecting dollars into the nonprofit and into the social housing sector. So I hear you. We will continue to advocate. And when I talk with my colleagues, when I talk with the mayor, when I talk with the city manager, I'll continue to emphasize the importance of more capital dollars, especially for affordable housing. So thank you so much for that question. I'll hand it off to Erin to maybe pose a question from the chat.
Thank you, Councillor. I have two related questions, one from Tim and the other from Danica. What mechanisms exist to look forward at potential costs and revenues? For example, there is strong evidence that climate change may cause increased costs if not addressed in the near future, such as 2 to 5 years. Wildfires and floods, for example, could add large potential costs. And Danica followed up with also wondering, in this category, does the city currently cost out what the cost of climate change is to the city every year?
I know we've been having those discussions, so I might toss it to Cyril, and then I might also respond to the question. But since it was a bit technical in terms of measurement, I'll I'll toss it to Cyril first.
Yeah, so there's been a few things that we're doing. Obviously, in the past 3-4 years, we established a climate change team. Most recently, back in April timeframe, there was a little bit of a reorg internally in the city where we kind of refocus where that climate change team report into. So it's now part of a strategic initiatives team, which was a good important step to do internally. In addition, in 2023, we started to integrate the climate change lens into our budget. And if you go back to the 2024 budget documentation, specifically the transmittal report. So the transmittal report is a report that we produce on budget tabling day. So if you go back to, I think it was November 8th of 2023, when we tabled the 2024 budget and referred to that council agenda day, you can see the transmittal report. And within that report, don't quote me exactly, but our investments in 2024 was roughly around 234 million or so in terms of climate change. And what that reflected was, we've broken down climate change in terms of the impact to adaptation, resiliency, and GHG reductions. And we looked at things that were at a low impact, a medium impact, and a high impact. And that was the quantitative value that was part of the 2024 budget. So we continue to put that focus there. Also, from an accounting standard perspective, we are integrating carbon financing into our financial statements. So we're one of the few municipalities that were the first ones out of the gate to do that. So between those two measures, we're really taking a priority stance in terms of investing in the climate change. We continue to have that view across many of our functions. So as another example, fleet services reports into my department, into myself. So that's where all the city fleet vehicles reside. And one of the strategies that we'll be coming forward with early in the new year is the green fleet strategy. And what that really means, if you were to boil it down to simplicity, the direction really is when we replace an existing vehicle in the city, the first decision point is buy electric. If the electric vehicle is not available from an operational perspective, you buy a hybrid model. If that vehicle is not available from an operation perspective, then you can default back to the normal gas, hydrocarbon type options. And I say it that way because the technology doesn't exist for some of our operations. So there is no electric snowplow available in the marketplace. But when there is, we will be buying that. The zero emission bus program is a significant investment by the city and Infrastructure Bank of Canada, where we have a very strong mandate to replace all of our buses to electric over the next 4 to 5 years. So that's a significant contribution. That's one of our biggest, contributions to negative climate change is the use of diesel buses. So the plan is to replace all with electric buses. So those are just a couple of examples in terms of the priority focus. And again, it's a term of council priority. And that's how we've been integrating that into basically everything we do from a budget, from an operation perspective.
And I know you're the auditor, the CFA, the CFO, so I don't want to correct you, but from my notes from last year, I had that the city had allocated 278 million to climate-related purposes, which is a little bit higher than the 230, as well as including $5 million for implementing the 2020-2025 climate change master plan in the previous tax year. So I think we're starting. We would acknowledge, even a previous chair of the Environmental and Climate Change Committee has acknowledged that obviously we need to do more. That spending is integrated with infrastructure spending like stormwater management and other things that will become increasingly important as climate change accelerates and we see more storms and floods and other meteorological events that will really create a massive impact. So we know that we do need to spend more there. There is the focus on that, but there's also the focus as well in terms of working with all of our partners, including the private sector, who will play a major role in mitigating the challenges of climate change. So just want you to know that serious discussions take place on an ongoing basis in the Environment and Climate Change Committee, in which I'm a member, and we're going to continue to pursue policies, I believe, that will address climate-related challenges and attempt to increase the dollars that are allocated to that. I know that Elizabeth has logged back in, so I'd love to throw it back to her to see if we can hear the question she wants to pose. And Elizabeth, you're on mute. If you can hear us, we just want to throw back to you since I dropped off and came back to ask a question. Okay, noting that we haven't had a response from Elizabeth, let's go to Liam, who's been waiting patiently.
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you, Councillor, staff, and fellow residents. I have a quick question about, in the presentation, there was mention of a brief part of one of the slides mentioned new revenue streams. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the approval process might be for a new revenue stream? If it's different from other council items, and if there's anything we can do as residents, if we have an idea like this, to improve our case to council. Because it's good to have ideas, but it's better to have ideas that you think might work and might get through the process. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for your time.
I hear you. And I might refer this question once again to Cyril first, and then I might jump in as well.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll try and not to go too broad, but there's a couple of things right now in this term of council. In 2023, they endorsed a service review framework. So that basically was based on 4 different pillars. There's been extensive consultation on each of those pillars, kind of framed in a phased process. I think either this week or next week, the 3rd theme is being released, and that's a forum where every resident in the city can provide input and feedback in terms of suggestions for cost savings, continuous improvement, or revenue ideas. So we are taking that process very seriously. Number 2, the Municipal Act is 444 municipalities in the city of Ontario. 443 are governed by the Municipal Act, and then the 1 is governed by the Toronto Act. So you can, guess which one is governed by the Toronto Act, City of Toronto. City of Toronto has many more different taxing authorities, and I'll call it revenue authorities, than the other 443 municipalities in the province. So we're always working closely with the province in terms of exploring that same type of, I'll call it opportunity, because there are opportunities that Toronto can leverage that other municipalities don't. And those could, a simple example is a specific parking tax levy. That's a levy that Toronto has the ability to tax parking lots effectively versus other municipalities don't. So that's one that we continue to move forward with in terms of working with our provincial colleagues. In terms of other revenue ideas, if there are new user fees to be implemented, we cannot implement a new policy user fee in the budget. That needs to go before or outside the budget process. Earlier this year, there was a report that went to the EPS committee, that's the Emergency Protective Services Committee. Stemming from the service review framework, there was a recommendation to explore false fire alarm calls. So this is a scenario where if you go to the mall and a kid pulls the fire alarm, fire operations deploy, that costs money. It takes away, staff time to go to a false fire alarm. So council endorsed that policy, and you'll see in this budget, there's about 400K of new revenue projected to come in 2025 for that user fee. There's other services that do that same type of scenario where, there are scenarios where we get reoccurrences of certain public and private institutions that have recurring calls, and that does cost the city quite a bit of money. So again, new user fees are implemented outside the budget, and then we capture that revenue source inside the budget as part of that process.
Thank you for that. And, I just wanted to say that, yeah, we are always exploring different revenue sources that are permitted. And I think that's the challenge. And if they are not permitted, we are advocating for different types of tools from senior level, from the provincial government. I think it's important to note that we are always having conversations with whether it's at the administrative level with Cyril and his team and other teams throughout the city, other departments. And at the political level, we are always asking about enhancements to revenue. As example, we are a member of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and just this summer, I attended the conference in Calgary. The FCM had asked the federal government for an enhanced financial framework for municipalities that would be able to access more dollars from the so-called gas tax. So at the political level, when I talk to colleagues from Queen's Park or at FCM, and we have a good membership here in the city in terms of our own representatives, and the mayor, we are always making representations to ask for additional revenue sources based on the fact that we are utilizing a 19th century model and we're in the 21st century. And we have a lot of more complexity in terms of what is required by cities and the services that we need to provide. It's also important to note that many, all the services that are provided by the city is mandated by the province directly. And so it's always important to have your voice, at the table in terms of contacting provincial representatives. Because often what we're finding is that we have to provide more and more services, but we have less and less revenue sources outside of the tax, outside of the provincial tax, outside of the property tax base. And that's very challenging, obviously, for us. So I just want you to know that, there are some initiatives that Cyril has outlined that we are examining in terms of revenue tools. And we are always advocating for ways to tap into additional revenue sources and, really developing, designing, and proposing different revenue tools to senior levels of government. The question is their receptiveness and their speed in terms of implementation of those potential new revenue tools.
Okay, Councillor, I think I'm gonna give two more examples because I think they're two good examples I just thought of, if you don't mind. Sure. Another one is the VUT, and again, the VUT does have different opinions across the city, and at the end of the day, council endorsed the strategy. We actually have an updated VUT report going to FinCorp on November 6th. What's important to note about that program is, and it's in that report, there's a net contribution of $10.6 million to affordable housing. So the importance of the VUT as a revenue source is the program costs about $2.3 million to administer per year. We collect about $12.6 million. So the net 10.3, 10.4 thereabouts. The net revenue of $10+ million is directly allocated to affordable housing initiatives. So that not only is that a key number one thing, the other thing you'll find, the report goes live on Monday. We now went through one full complete cycle of the program. we actually saw a net contribution of over 1,600 units go back into the market. So in year one, there was revenue collected for vacant unit housing. In year two, over 1,600 units went back into the housing stock. So we collected revenue, which we gave a net contribution to affordable housing capital investments. At the same time, we've seen a lot of the units that were vacant in year one of the program go back into the market in year two of the program. So not only did we get financial contribution to housing, we also got more stock back into the market. And the other one I'll be real quick is earlier this year in March timeframe, we were successful in inking the deal with the province. So the Ontario-Ottawa deal was a $543 million deal. The first in the history of the city of Ottawa, the second in the province. Toronto signed one last year. So that was a significant uplift in funding for specific type of investments. But any dollar we get helps us overall. So that's another two examples of different revenue scenarios.
And I appreciate that, Cyril, because I think it dovetails into one of the questions around what my office specifically is doing around housing and affordable housing. And I can say that I supported the VUT, the vacant unit tax. A lot of people saw it as being controversial, but we think it's important to ensure that if units are there, that they should be on the market. And especially if we have affordability crisis and a housing crisis. And so that is an important revenue tool. The other area that of focus has been really ensuring that we advocate hard for substantive investments in housing in the ward. And I feel that, we've been successful in doing that. And frankly, in the first couple months that I was elected in 2019, OCH had approached my office and asked whether we would be interested in pursuing OCH housing development at Mickenack on Mickenack Road in Wateridge Village. We said yes. I said that if I was here earlier, I would have said yes. I would have said yes the day before. And we just a week ago actually had a celebration at the community. So that's a $55 million investment. And we saw also a $1 million investment in the same community for Habitat for Humanity development. We worked on ensuring that about a $6 million investment was put into the Shepherds of Good Hope Richcraft building on Montreal Road that provides 42 supportive housing units. So there have been a number of investments like this that I've been supportive of. I'll continue to be supportive of them. We are also working with other urban council colleagues on looking at the potential of a renoviction bylaw. So I'm actively working with a number of my urban city colleagues on that as well. I think that's very important. I think there was also mention of the land trust. We're definitely supportive of these types of initiatives that ensure that we see greater investment in nonprofits. We're also going to have conversations with colleagues to see if there's any interest in a formal contribution from the city into the land trust. I know that one of my council colleagues or a couple of my council colleagues have been able to use Section 37 dollars. So those are dollars from developments that might exceed specific planning rules. And as a result, extra dollars need to be put into the community. And I know that some of those dollars have been allocated at the discretion of councillors. We have to have a wider discussion as to whether this is a model that we would want to support. personally, I would not mind seeing, a small investment made from the city directly. But of course, that would be subjected to a council directive. And so we need to have a conversation about that. Notwithstanding the fact that we do have our own social housing agency and we need to fund that well, we need to fund Ottawa community housing well. And we need to continue to move forward with capital projects. I see potential as well in community-driven projects like the Ottawa Community Land Trust. So we're going to continue to have those discussions, but definitely committed. It's one of my number one concerns based on all of the challenging situations we hear from our own residents in our ward about housing and its affordability. So we'll continue to seek maximal dollars for investment in Rideau-Rockcliffe around affordable housing. And Aaron, I don't know if there are any other questions in the
Councillor,
chat.
it's Michelle. I have Elizabeth's question.
Okay,
she sent it to me because she was having so much difficulty. So it's a question for Cyril. The presentation on the budget indicated the budget proposals come from the bottom up. Programs and services request the budgets they need, yet there is no mechanism to monitor results of the programs or their alignment to the city's strategic plan and the official plan and the other 17 strategies and plans. Will your office and the new strategic initiatives group be moving to results-based budgeting? Is the Bloomberg Foundation funding assisting your office?
Great question. So there's a couple of things there. So the term of council priorities do all come with performance measures. Every term of council priority is a couple. So there's 4 main term of council priorities. I call them themes. And within each theme, there's a number of different deliverables and outcomes, performance metrics assigned to each one of those. And we are tracking that. And the strategic initiatives team will be reporting back sometime in the new year. I don't even know exactly, but they will be reporting back in terms of the to-date outcomes and performance metrics. In addition to that, a significant number of our operations do report back throughout the year on operational metrics. And I'll use paramedics as an easy one because it's easy to relate to. So paramedics reports on an annual basis the number of calls, the severity of each call, and the number of times they hit level 0. So that's where there's calls in the queue that they can't respond to. Bylaw reports back on metrics as well. The winter operations, we capture that usually throughout our annual disposition report, and that report is basically the year-end report. So we report back usually in April, which is a report back in the previous year. So in April of 2025, you will see the 2024 year-end report, and we'll report back on the results from a financial perspective, and we layer in metrics there where we can on service standards. So again, winter operations are guided by different service standards. So as an example, they typically deploy into residential streets to clear snow once it hits 10 centimeters. So that's one of the service standards that they use. So we usually reference that in that disposition report. What we were also doing as well is, again, throughout this term of council, we've committed to enhancing the budget process. So we've each of the 23 and the 2024 budget, and you'll see more in this 2025 budget. We've been integrating more performance type metrics. So in the last year, we created a new document we labeled as the budget magazine. And within that report, we report back on our debt service levels, our debt servicing ratios. We report back on our tracking towards closing our infrastructure funding gap. So we are continuously building out performance metrics. To your question on Bloomberg, so there's a 2-pronged approach here where internally we continue to build out performance metrics. Externally, we are leveraging Bloomberg where we can to support building out additional metrics. So these are all things that will be ongoing, and you'll see more this cycle, and you'll see even more the next cycle. So every year we've been focusing on building out more performance measures, because it is an extremely important process to follow to really show and demonstrate that we are achieving not only positive outcomes, but if we're achieving negative outcomes, then it sends a signal that there's an opportunity to reduce or stop or reallocate funding, because if we're not getting the outcomes that we need, then that's a measure that we use in making those decisions.
Thank you for that. I know that there was a question that Danica had posed around the OCH budget. She was asking, is that in the city budget or is it separate? I'm curious about the plans for OCH in Overbrook. I can say that I'm no longer a member of the board of OCH. I was in the previous term. OCH is self-governing, so it's its own self-governing corporation that reports to city council, since the city is its singular shareholder. It had produced a budget. It produces an annual budget and actually reports to council, and I think it tabled its budget in January of 2024. And at that time, it had projected that 55% of its revenue would be generated from rental income from tenants, while 41% was provided through the City of Ottawa through the form of subsidies and grants, and that the remaining 4% of revenue came from operations such as parking and laundry and commercial space, and that its budgeted expenses for 2024 were estimated at approximately $227 million. 63.7 million has been allocated to new affordable housing construction, and its total capital budget for 2024 was estimated at 70 million. So there are a number of projects. I think we've actually benefited from a few in Overbrook, especially around renewal. So this is not the sexy stuff, but the buildings need to be fixed up. And I get regular reports on OCH about investments through their capital improvement programs around window replacements, around elevator modernization, as example, in 251, 255 Donald. Their structural repair programs that are being undertaken, mechanical repair to ensure proper maintenance of the existing stock, which is aging. And just to briefly speak about OCH, they are developing, they had been developing plans for renewal. As we know, many of the homes, the side-by-sides, are actually approaching 70 years in terms of life, and that is way beyond their life cycle. So OCH is interested in undertaking a renewal project for Overbrook right now, due to some financial considerations as well as some small infrastructure considerations. Those plans are on hold in a sense, but OCH will seek dollars to ensure that the planning cycle for Overbrook does ideally advance in the next term of council. Next term of council will start in 2026, after 2026. So OCH does want to do the pre-planning. What is important to note is that OCH will do that pre-planning with community consultation, and it's dedicated to that. It's also dedicated to ensuring that there is no tenant displacement. So these are key elements of any plan that OCH would go forward with, but OCH has not, developed that plan. And when it does develop the plan, it will be in conjunction with the community. The one thing I can say is that I will continue to advocate for greater amenities if there is any renewal. And one of the things I had really been dedicated to is the idea of a community house in any OCH renewal in Overbrook. So we'll continue to advocate for that when the renewal process starts. But right now, I can frankly say it is on hold. OCH is really taking up its new role in a sense as a property developer. We have to remember that OCH did not really undertake a lot of property development ventures. Before, what happened was we had a large stock of property that the province owned and operated and transferred to the municipality. Now we are seeing dollars from senior levels of government for new construction projects through capital programs. We're starting to take advantage of that. The focus right now is in the downtown environs in terms of building out properties there. The property in Rideau-Rockcliffe, the McKinnack property, has been in effect completed, but Overbrook is going to be an area of focus, and when it is, and when OCH really restarts that renewal process, residents will be the first to know. And I don't know if there are any other questions.
There's one up higher in the chat, Councillor, where Deborah asks, you indicate that the budget has to be balanced, but it's clear that you can borrow money. Is there a limit to the amount that can be borrowed? And how is the interest required for borrowed money reported? And finally, are all of these reports available to the public?
So I'll definitely defer to Cyril on this technical question.
Yeah, great question. I always try and keep it simple, but I do tend to go broad. So the Municipal Act does state that municipalities are allowed to carry debt up to a maximum of 25% of own source revenue. So what that means is basically I could issue, if I take $100,000 house as an example, and I issue a mortgage on that, I can issue a mortgage up to 25% of the cost of debt service that. This council is actually taking a more stronger stance, and not this term of council, but previous councils have approved a fiscal framework where they reduced that 25% down to 7.5%. And we actually report every year as part of the budget process, and again, as part of the annual financial statements, the actual ratio. Our ratio tends to be below 5%. So what that means is, legislatively, municipalities are allowed to go 25%. Council has brought that to 7.5%, and we actually are even more fiscally prudent, where we track typically in that 5% or below 5% level. So again, we're allowed to issue debt on large infrastructure. Most of our debt is on roads infrastructure. So roads typically is amortized over 20 years. We also have a lot of debt on our buildings and our stage 1 and stage 2, so the train system. So those amortizations tend to be 30 years or 40 years. It's also important to note that because of our strong reserve balance, because of our strong and low debt levels, and when you measure debt against 7.5 and the 25%, we have a AA+ credit rating from S&P. We have a AAA credit rating from Moody's. So those are your two main credit raters in the marketplace. And what that means is that we can issue debt at very, very affordable and competitive rates. So because we effectively have a large equity, we carry a lot of equity in our balance sheet. And again, because of the low debt ratio of 5%, our strong reserve balances, we get strong credit ratings, so we get preferential lending rates. So when we do take out debt, those three things combined allows us to, make money go further because the interest on the money we take out is lower because of those factors that I kind of identified. Again, all that information is available on ottawa.ca. Ottawa.ca, I will admit, is very overwhelming because there's so much information there. The best, way to start getting into understanding that information is throughout the budget process. So when we table the budget on November 13th, there will be, again, you heard me say a transmittal report. That transmittal report is a very good starting point because it's is a pretty detailed report in terms of the narrative behind the budget, but we also have 5 to 6 different supporting documents. And one of those documents actually outlines the amount of issued debt, the amount of unissued debt, the amount of retiring debt, and the amount of new debt. So we basically report on pretty much every aspect of all financials in our budget book itself. Our budget book is close to 1,000 pages. So again, the transmittal report is probably your best bet to go to first, and those documents. And then from there, you can get more details through the actual massive 1,000-page document.
Yeah, we appreciate that technical input, and we definitely invite everybody on November 13th when the budget is tabled to examine those documents. The transmittal report is slightly easier reading than the binders that are behind me. Yeah. But rest assured, your counselors and their staff are going page by page through those documents, looking at every project and asking questions where relevant. I did see a question, I think, come in from Jane Thompson. This might be the last outstanding question. For budget areas where there are specific user groups such as affordable housing providers, transit users, or those who make development applications, is there a policy to consult with these groups on improvements to the system so that money can be spent more effectively and directed where most needed? I think this would generate a great deal of useful information for making budget decisions and running programs. I can just quickly start and then maybe toss to Cyril, but there isn't a file that I'm aware of where the city is not actually consulting stakeholder groups. I find whether it is general land use policies or social service investment policies, there's typically stakeholder consulting that occurs, and that's pretty extensive. So I would argue that these decisions are never made in a vacuum. There's always inputs, especially from interest groups, advocacy groups. There are formal structures to some of them in terms of advisory committees. And I think that it's very powerful as a model. I know increasingly that's a model that is being utilized for the development of both equity policies and social service policies. So as example, just a few days ago, the Community Services Committee received a report and a recommendation around poverty reduction strategy. There was a large amount of consultation with people with lived experience with poverty, as well as social service agencies on the creation of that strategy. In fact, that strategy itself was led by social service agencies who had an advisory committee who assisted in its development. So I would just say that that's something that's always happening. It doesn't mean that we can't enhance what we're doing and how we're doing it. But I see great value with really asking stakeholders as to, are we doing this right? Could we do this better? Where can there be cost savings? Where alternatively can there be more investment? These things are all very important, and I think it creates better policy, because I don't believe that these policies can be made in a vacuum. And most importantly, we create scenarios like this where the public and residents, who are paying directly for these services, can provide input. So I think that's very important. And, we will continue to enhance, at least from the political perspective, I want to ensure that we continue to enhance these types of stakeholder and resident inputs into all policies that are considered by council. And so, Aaron, I don't know if there are any other questions that have come in.
Councillor, I don't see any additional questions in the chat or any hands raised.
Yeah. And I think I saw one more comment. Zoom users may be interested to know that it is possible to file the entire chat into a file on their own computer. Yes. And I also want to emphasize that we are recording this session, so we will ensure that it is on my YouTube channel. We already posted the video from the equity budget consultation that was held 2 days ago. And we'll ensure that this is also made available for your review. Seeing that there are no other questions, of course, as city staff had stated before, the budget is an ongoing process, and I want to salute Cyril as well as his staff members for the amount of work, the tremendous amount of work that they undertake on an ongoing basis to really outline and create the budget, because it's the most important document that the city issues. It really does set the blueprint as to the direction forward. And so that's why it's important for us to hear from you. But I really want to thank city staff for the long hours that they put in to provide some education about the process and to respond to your questions. I also want to thank all of you for providing valuable input, questions, and participating in this budget consultation. Your insights definitely will play a crucial role in shaping the budget. I want you to know that your inputs are important, and I take those inputs directly to my colleagues, to the mayor, to the city manager, in terms of what I'm hearing from residents, and make the asks around that for the upcoming budget. I think it's important to note that the elements that I have heard from residents and that are key priorities for me are greater investments in transit, especially with the uncertainties around the transit budget, greater investments in social services, so that we can address the challenges in our community, especially in high priority, low income prevalent neighborhoods, which we have a number of in Rideau-Rockcliffe that really require support. Investments in infrastructure, I think that ties into climate change. We heard concerns about the investments there, and I'll continue to advocate for that, as well as greater investments in our parks and green spaces. So these are the key concerns that I've heard over the last 8 to 12 months from residents. And I do want you to know that I will be taking that directly to my colleagues and focusing on these areas as the budget is tabled. As always, you can always contact our office on an ongoing basis around concerns that you might have, and and areas of focus that you want us to look at for the budget and other policies. And if you have any additional thoughts or questions, please feel free to email us. Your continued engagement is essential to building a stronger, more equitable community for all. And I'm really gratified that you had decided to spend a good chunk of your evening with us. So I really want to thank you for your time and commitment to this process, to providing input to make our city a better place. So with that, I want to wish everybody a good night, and please feel free, like I said, to reach out to us if you have any other concerns. Thank you so much.